The rain hadn't stopped for 3 days. Vincent Marcello stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his private study, watching water streak down the glass in endless rivulets. Beyond the manicured lawns of his estate, the Hudson River churned gray and restless under the autumn storm. The trees lining his property had already surrendered most of their leaves, their bare branches reaching toward a sky that promised nothing but more cold, more rain, more of the same relentless emptiness that had become his life. He was 42 years old, and he felt ancient. Behind him, the antique grandfather clock ticked with metronomic precision, each second measured, accounted for, just like everything else in Vincent's world. Control, order, power. These were the pillars upon which he'd built an empire that stretched from the docks of New York City to the construction sites of New Jersey, from the high-end restaurants of Manhattan to the shipping routes that connected 3 states. The Marcello family name meant something. It opened doors. It closed mouths. It commanded respect, or more accurately, fear. But respect and fear couldn't give him the one thing his organization demanded: an heir. Vincent turned from the window, his reflection ghosting across the dark glass. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair silvering at the temples, and eyes the color of slate. His tailored suit fit perfectly, Italian wool that cost more than most people made in a month. Everything about him was calculated, controlled, powerful. Everything except the hollow ache in his chest that 3 years hadn't managed to fill. A sharp knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. "Come in," Vincent said, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. The door opened to reveal Marco Benedetti, his underboss, and the closest thing to a friend Vincent had allowed himself in the past decade. Marco was shorter, stockier, with the weathered face of a man who'd seen too much and said too little. He'd been with Vincent for 15 years, loyal to a fault. "They're ready for you," Marco said, his Brooklyn accent thick despite years of trying to soften it for business meetings. "The whole crew's downstairs. And Vince, they're getting restless." Vincent nodded, straightening his already perfect tie. "How restless?" "Tommy Caruso brought it up before you even got here. Says the Santoro family's been making noise, saying we're vulnerable without clear succession. Says they're calling us weak." "Tommy always was dramatic," Vincent said, though his jaw tightened. "But he's not wrong to be concerned." Marco stepped further into the study, closing the door behind him. The sound of the rain seemed to intensify in the sudden privacy. "Vince, you know I don't like to push, but it's been 3 years. Elena." "Don't." The single word cut through the air like a blade. Marco held up his hands. "I'm just saying what everyone's thinking. You're not getting any younger. The organization needs to know there's a future. That's all they want. Assurance." Vincent poured himself 2 fingers of scotch from the crystal decanter on his desk. He didn't offer one to Marco. "And what would you have me do, Marco? Marry the first suitable woman they parade in front of me? Father a child out of obligation? If that's what it takes." The honesty was brutal, but Vincent had always valued that about Marco. No games, no political maneuvering, just the raw truth. "My wife died giving me an heir," Vincent said quietly, the words still tasting like ash in his mouth after all this time. "My son died before he took his first breath. You want me to go through that again?" Marco's expression softened, something few people ever witnessed. "I want you to live again, Vince. This," he gestured around the opulent study. "This isn't living. This is existing. You've turned into a ghost haunting your own life." Vincent downed the scotch in one swallow, welcoming the burn. "Ghosts don't run empires." "No, but they don't build futures either." The 2 men stared at each other for a long moment, the only sound the relentless drumming of rain against the windows and the steady tick of the clock. Finally, Vincent set down his glass. "Let's get this over with." The conference room on the mansion's ground floor had been designed to intimidate. 20-foot ceilings, dark wood paneling, a table that could seat 16 people comfortably. Original oil paintings, legitimate ones, not the kind that fell off trucks, adorned the walls. Everything spoke of old money, established power, the kind of legitimacy that Vincent had spent his entire adult life cultivating. 11 men sat around the table, all of them dressed in expensive suits, all of them representing different arms of the Marcello organization. Construction, shipping, real estate, import-export, waste management. On paper, everything was legal. In practice, the lines were considerably blurrier. The conversation died the moment Vincent entered. "Gentlemen," he said, taking his seat at the head of the table. Marco positioned himself standing behind Vincent's right shoulder, a silent sentinel. "Boss." they murmured in near unison, a chorus of respect that Vincent had long since stopped finding satisfying. Tommy Caruso, a man in his 50s with thinning hair and expensive dental work, cleared his throat. "Vince, thanks for taking the time. We know you're busy." Vincent leaned back in his chair, fingers steepled. "You asked for this meeting, Tommy. I assume there's a reason beyond social niceties." Tommy glanced at the others, drawing courage from their silent support. "We're concerned about the future of the organization. Be specific." "Succession," Tommy said bluntly. "You're not married. You have no children. If something were to happen to you, nothing's going to happen to me. With respect, boss, that's not something anyone can guarantee. You run an organization with a lot of moving parts, a lot of people depending on clear leadership. We need to know there's a plan." Vincent's expression remained neutral, but inside, familiar anger stirred. Not at Tommy. He was just voicing what they all thought, but at the situation itself, at the cosmic joke that had taken everything from him and left him with nothing but power and money and the crushing weight of responsibility. "You want a plan?" Vincent said softly, his tone dangerous. "Here's the plan. I run this organization until I decide otherwise. When and if I choose to name a successor, you'll be informed. Until then, you do your jobs, you make money, and you remember who built everything you're sitting on." The room went silent. A few men shifted uncomfortably in their seats. But Tommy, either brave or foolish, pressed on. "The Santoros are spreading rumors, saying we're weak, saying without family, without blood succession, we're just a business that'll fall apart the moment you're gone. They're testing our territories, Vince, making moves they wouldn't have dared 3 years ago." Vincent's jaw clenched. "The Santoros have always been opportunistic parasites. That's nothing new. But they're not wrong," said Frank DeLuca, the construction boss, speaking up for the first time. He was younger than most of the others, ambitious but generally loyal. "In our world, family means everything. Blood means everything. You taught us that yourself." The irony wasn't lost on Vincent. He had taught them that, had built his entire philosophy around it. The Marcello family had been in this business for 3 generations. His grandfather had come over from Sicily with nothing but determination and a willingness to do what others wouldn't. His father had expanded the operation, made it respectable on the surface, and Vincent had turned it into an empire, all built on the foundation of family, of blood, of legacy, and now he had none of it. "Your concern is noted," Vincent said, his tone making it clear the discussion was over. "But this meeting is finished. Get back to work, all of you." They filed out slowly, exchanging glances but saying nothing. Only Marco remained, waiting until the door clicked shut before speaking. "That went well," he said dryly. Vincent stood, walking back to the windows. The rain continued its assault on the glass. "They're not wrong, Marco. Any of them. I know. 3 years ago, I had everything. A wife I loved, a child on the way, a future that made sense." Vincent's voice was quiet, almost lost beneath the sound of the storm. "Now I have money and power and nothing that matters." Marco moved to stand beside him, both men staring out at the gray world beyond the windows. "Elena wouldn't want you to spend the rest of your life like this. Elena's dead." The words were flat, final. "And our son died with her. Don't tell me what she'd want. Someone has to." Vincent turned to look at his friend, seeing genuine concern in those weathered features. Marco had been there that night 3 years ago, had driven like hell to get Vincent to the hospital, had stood beside him when the doctor delivered news that shattered everything Vincent thought he knew about the world. Complications, hemorrhaging, emergency surgery, a tiny, perfect boy who never drew breath, a wife who whispered "I'm sorry" with her last words as if any of it had been her fault. Vincent had buried them both in the family plot, under gray skies much like today's. He'd stood dry-eyed through the funeral, accepting condolences from people who feared him too much to offer real comfort, and then he'd gone home to this mansion, climbed the stairs to the nursery they'd so carefully prepared, and locked the door. He hadn't opened it since. "I should check on the household," Vincent said abruptly, needing to move, to do something other than stand here drowning in memories. "Has Sophia finished with the West Wing?" Marco's eyebrows rose slightly at the sudden change of subject, but he didn't comment. "The new maid? I think so. She's been working her way through the whole 2nd floor this week." "Good. She's thorough. She's also about 8 months pregnant, Vince. You sure we should have her climbing ladders and scrubbing floors?" Vincent waved a dismissive hand. "She insisted she could handle the work. We're paying her well enough. If she wants to keep working until the baby comes, that's her choice." Seems harsh. Seems practical. She needs the money. We need someone who actually pays attention to detail. Unlike that last girl who left water stains on every mirror in the house. Marco shrugged. Your house, your rules. But don't say I didn't warn you when she goes into labor in the middle of polishing your silverware. She's not due for another month. Babies don't check calendars, Vince. Vincent spent the rest of the afternoon in his study, reviewing reports and making decisions that affected hundreds of people who'd never know his name. Numbers on spreadsheets, contracts to approve, problems to solve. It was all mechanical, routine. He'd long since stopped feeling any satisfaction from it. Dinner was served in the formal dining room at 7, though Vincent ate alone as he did every night. The chef prepared meals for one, served them on china that had once set tables for 12. Vincent barely tasted the food, working through documents between bites, his mind already on tomorrow's meetings. He didn't notice Sophia until she appeared in the doorway, hesitant and apologetic. Mr. Marcello, I'm sorry to interrupt your dinner. Vincent looked up, really seeing her for perhaps the first time since he'd hired her 6 months ago. Sophia Ramirez was small, maybe 5'3", with dark hair pulled back in a practical bun, and warm brown eyes that seemed perpetually worried. The uniform she wore, a simple black dress with white trim, was clearly straining against her pregnant belly. She looked exhausted. What is it, Sophia? He asked, not unkindly but not particularly warmly either. The guest room in the north wing, the radiator is making a strange noise. I wasn't sure if I should call maintenance or if you wanted to check it first. Vincent set down his fork. In the 6 months Sophia had worked here, she'd never once disturbed him during meals. The fact that she had now meant she was genuinely concerned about doing the right thing. I'll have Marco look at it tomorrow, he said. Anything else? She hesitated, her hand unconsciously moving to her belly. No, sir. Thank you. I'll finish the library and then head to my quarters. It's past 7 o'clock, Sophia. You should have been done hours ago. I know, sir, but I got a late start this morning. I had a doctor's appointment. Is everything all right? With the baby? The question surprised them both. Vincent didn't make a habit of asking personal questions of the staff, didn't get involved in their lives beyond what was professionally necessary. But something about Sophia's obvious exhaustion, the way she swayed slightly on her feet, triggered an unexpected concern. Everything's fine, Sophia said quickly. The doctor says the baby's healthy, just getting big, ready to arrive soon. You should rest. I will, sir, after I finish the library. Sophia. Vincent's voice carried just enough authority to make her freeze. Rest. The library can wait until tomorrow. She looked uncertain, clearly torn between following orders and completing her work. Vincent recognized the impulse. He'd built his entire life on refusing to stop, refusing to rest, working until exhaustion was the only thing that let him sleep. That's not a suggestion, he added. Go rest. That's an order. A small smile touched Sophia's tired face. Yes, sir. Thank you. She turned to leave, then paused in the doorway. Mr. Marcello, I just wanted to say, I'm grateful for this job, for the opportunity. I know I'm not as fast as I used to be, but I promise I'm doing my best. Vincent studied her for a moment. This young woman who worked harder than she probably should, who worried about disturbing him over a radiator, who smiled even when she was clearly exhausted and uncomfortable. I know you are, he said quietly. That's why you're still here. After she left, Vincent sat alone in the too large dining room, surrounded by the echoes of meals shared with people who no longer existed, and wondered when exactly his life had become so hollow that the gratitude of a housemaid was the most genuine human interaction he'd had all week. Vincent woke at 2:47 a.m. For a moment he lay in the darkness of his bedroom, listening to the rain that still hadn't stopped, trying to identify what had pulled him from the thin, unsatisfying sleep he'd finally managed to achieve. The house was silent, as always. The security system would have alerted him to any breach. Everything was as it should be. Then he heard it again, a sound so faint he almost thought he'd imagined it. A cry, distant, muffled, but unmistakably human. Vincent sat up, instantly alert. He was out of bed in seconds, pulling on a robe over his sleep clothes, his mind racing through possibilities. An intruder, one of the staff in trouble, a security breach. He moved through the dark hallways of the mansion with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of his domain. The sound came again, louder now, more insistent. It was coming from the east wing, where the staff quarters were located. As Vincent got closer, the sound resolved into something specific, something that made his chest tighten with a recognition he couldn't quite name. A baby crying. No, That wasn't possible. There were no babies in his house. Hadn't been for 3 years. Wouldn't be again. But the sound was unmistakable, high-pitched, insistent, the particular wail of a newborn demanding attention. Vincent found himself standing outside Sophia's room, his hand raised to knock, frozen by the realization of what must have happened. She'd gone into labor, here, in his house. The door was slightly ajar, light spilling into the hallway. Through the gap, Vincent could hear voices, female, urgent, but not panicked. Someone was with her, one of the other maids probably. And still, that cry, that impossible, heartbreaking, beautiful sound of new life. Vincent's hand trembled. He couldn't remember the last time anything had made him tremble, but this sound, this cry, was reaching into a part of him he'd thought died 3 years ago in that hospital room. He'd heard this sound before, in his nightmares, in the fantasies he tortured himself with late at night. His son had never made this sound, had never drawn breath to cry, to protest his arrival into the world, to demand the attention and care that every newborn deserved. But somewhere on the other side of this door, Sophia's baby was crying, was alive, was real. Vincent lowered his hand without knocking. This wasn't his moment, wasn't his child, wasn't his business. He should turn away, go back to bed, let the staff handle this. Sophia would need a few days to recover and then she'd be back to work. He'd arrange for childcare or maternity leave or whatever was appropriate. Marco would handle the details. This had nothing to do with him. The baby cried again, and something in Vincent's chest cracked open. He stood there in the hallway, rain lashing against distant windows, the grandfather clock somewhere in the house marking time that seemed to have stopped altogether. Stood there listening to the cry of a child who wasn't his, would never be his, could never replace what he'd lost. But who was alive? Who was here? Who had entered the world in his house, under his roof, on this endless rainy night that felt like a turning point? Vincent didn't yet understand. Finally, slowly, Vincent turned away from the door. His feet felt heavy as he walked back down the hallway, back toward his cold, empty bedroom, back to the life he'd built out of power and control, and the absolute absence of anything that could hurt him again. Behind him, the baby's cry faded into the sound of soothing voices, of competent hands, of life moving forward whether he participated in it or not. Vincent made it halfway down the hall before he stopped. Just stopped. Stood there in the darkness, rain drumming against windows, the grandfather clock ticking, marking seconds that suddenly felt precious instead of burdensome. From Sophia's room, the crying stopped. Silence settled over the house like snow. And in that silence, Vincent felt something he hadn't felt in 3 years. The possibility that his carefully controlled, deliberately empty life might be about to change in ways he couldn't predict, couldn't control, and couldn't prevent. He stood there for a long time, caught between the past and whatever came next, while outside the storm raged on and inside his chest, something that felt dangerously like hope began, against all logic and his better judgment, to stir. Morning came gray and wet, the storm showing no signs of breaking. Vincent had eventually returned to his room but hadn't slept. He'd sat by his window, watching darkness give way to a dawn that brought no relief from the rain, thinking about the cry that had shattered the silence of his carefully ordered world. At 6:30 a.m., Marco knocked on his door. "Come in," Vincent called, already dressed in another immaculate suit, as if projecting control over his appearance could somehow extend to controlling the chaos he felt inside. Marco entered, carrying his usual morning coffee, and looking like he'd gotten even less sleep than Vincent. "We have a situation. Sophia, you know? I heard the baby last night." Vincent took the coffee, grateful for something to do with his hands. "How is she?" Marco looked surprised by the question but recovered quickly. "She's fine. The baby too. A boy. One of the other maids is a former nurse. She helped with the delivery. Clean. No complications. Sophia's resting now." A boy. Vincent turned to the window, hiding whatever expression had crossed his face. "Good. That's good. Arrange for a doctor to come check on them both. I want to make sure everything's actually fine." "Already done. Dr. Patterson will be here this afternoon." "And Sophia's job? Her living situation?" "That's the thing, Vince." Marco moved closer, lowering his voice even though they were alone. "A few of the other staff are already talking, saying maybe we should let her go, that a newborn in the house will be disruptive, that she won't be able to do her job properly anymore." Vincent's hand tightened on his coffee cup. "Who said that? Does it matter?" "Yes." Marco sighed. "Angela, mostly. The head housekeeper. She's got some old-fashioned ideas about working mothers. Angela can keep her opinions to herself, or she can find employment elsewhere. Vincent's voice was cold. Sophia stays. Her job is secure. If she needs accommodations, we'll make them. Is that clear? Crystal clear, boss, but can I ask why you're so invested in this? Vincent didn't have a good answer. Didn't understand it himself. He barely knew Sophia. She was just a maid, one of a dozen staff members who kept his house running. The fact that she'd given birth under his roof didn't change that. Except somehow it did. She's a good worker, Vincent said finally. Reliable. Thorough. Those qualities are hard to find. I'm not throwing them away because she had a baby. Marco studied him for a long moment, then nodded. I'll make sure everyone knows she's staying. Do that. After Marco left, Vincent stood by the window, coffee growing cold in his hands, listening to the sounds of the household waking up around him. Somewhere in the East Wing, a baby boy was sleeping, cradled against his mother's chest, both of them safe and warm and completely unaware that their presence had cracked something open, in the heart of a man who'd spent 3 years turning himself into stone. Vincent raised the coffee to his lips, then lowered it without drinking. The cry echoed in his memory, insistent and real. For the first time in 3 years, Vincent Marcello felt something other than the cold emptiness that had become his constant companion. He felt curious about Sophia's story, about the father who apparently wasn't in the picture, about the tiny life that had arrived during a storm in the middle of the night. And beneath the curiosity, dangerous and unwelcome, something that might have been longing. Vincent set down the coffee and returned to his desk, burying himself in work and numbers and decisions and the familiar comfort of problems that could be solved with money and power. But every so often, in the silence between phone calls and meetings, he heard it again, the cry of a newborn baby, the sound of life beginning, and try as he might, Vincent couldn't make himself stop listening. Winter had settled over upstate New York with a vengeance. The trees that had been bare in October were now skeletal silhouettes against perpetually gray skies, and frost painted intricate patterns on the mansion's windows each morning. The grounds crew worked overtime keeping the driveways clear of snow and ice, while inside, the heating system hummed constantly, fighting against the cold that seemed determined to seep through even the mansion's thick stone walls. Vincent had always liked winter. There was something honest about it, the way it stripped everything down to essentials, revealed the bones of things, made no apologies for its harshness. Summer pretended at warmth and ease. Winter told the truth, but this winter felt different. This winter, the silence of his mansion was regularly shattered by the sound of a crying baby. Vincent stood in his study, ostensibly reviewing a contract for a new construction project in Newark, but actually listening to the muffled wailing coming from somewhere in the East Wing. Again. It was 2:30 in the afternoon, and this was the third time today that Luca's cries had echoed through the hallways. The baby was 2 months old now, and according to Dr. Patterson, perfectly healthy, just colicky, fussy, one of those babies who seemed perpetually unsatisfied with the world they'd entered. Vincent had learned more about infant digestive issues in the past 8 weeks than he'd ever wanted to know. A sharp knock interrupted his thoughts. Angela, the head housekeeper, entered without waiting for permission, her face set in lines of severe disapproval. Mr. Marcello, I need to speak with you about Sophia. Vincent set down the contract he hadn't actually been reading. What about her? The baby, sir. He's been crying for hours every day. It's disruptive. The other staff can't concentrate on their work. I've received complaints from nearly everyone. And? Angela's thin eyebrows rose. And I think we need to reconsider her employment here. She's clearly unable to manage both the baby and her duties. Perhaps if we gave her a generous severance package, helped her find something more suitable for her situation. No, Mr. Marcello. I said no, Angela. Vincent's voice was quiet but carried the weight of absolute authority. Sophia stays. If the other staff have complaints, they can bring them to Marco. Or better yet, they can remember that they're being paid very well to do their jobs, regardless of ambient noise. Angela's mouth compressed into a thin line. With all due respect, sir, a crying baby is more than ambient noise. It's a child, Vincent interrupted. It's a child who lives here, who has every right to cry when he's uncomfortable. Sophia's doing her best under difficult circumstances. I won't punish her for that. The other staff feel it's unfair that she receives special treatment. The other staff don't sign their paychecks. I do. And I've made my decision. Vincent picked up the contract again. A clear dismissal. Was there anything else? Angela stood there for a moment, her disapproval radiating like heat. Finally, she turned on her heel and left, closing the door with just slightly more force than necessary. Vincent waited until her footsteps faded before allowing himself a long exhale. He wasn't sure why he was defending Sophia so adamantly. Angela had a point. The crying was disruptive. Sophia was clearly struggling to balance her duties with caring for an infant. It would be logical, even merciful, to help her find a position better suited to her circumstances. But every time he considered it, something in his chest tightened uncomfortably. The truth was Vincent had become unexpectedly aware of Sophia's presence in his household, not in any inappropriate way. He barely spoke to her beyond necessary exchanges, but he found himself tracking her movements through the house, noticing when she looked more tired than usual, observing the dark circles under her eyes, deepening week by week. And the baby, Luca. Vincent had made a point of learning the child's name, though he couldn't have explained why it mattered. He'd seen Luca exactly twice since the night he was born. Once, a week after the birth, when Dr. Patterson had been examining them both in Sophia's quarters and Vincent had walked past the open door. He'd caught a glimpse of a tiny face, eyes squeezed shut, mouth open in a wail of protest. The second time was just last week when Sophia had been carrying the baby through the hallway, trying to soothe him while simultaneously attempting to balance a basket of cleaning supplies. Vincent had stopped, watched her struggle for a moment, then quietly taken the basket from her without a word. "Thank you, Mr. Marcello," she'd whispered, looking both grateful and terrified that she'd somehow failed in her duties. Vincent had just nodded and walked away, the weight of the cleaning supplies nothing compared to the weight of the look in Sophia's eyes. Exhausted, overwhelmed, but determined. He'd recognized that look, had seen it in his own mirror during the worst days after Elena's death, when getting out of bed felt like climbing a mountain, but he'd done it anyway, because the alternative was surrender. Now, as Luca's cries finally subsided into silence, Vincent tried to refocus on his work, but concentration eluded him. Instead, he found himself wondering if Sophia had managed to calm the baby, or if Luca had simply exhausted himself into sleep, wondering if she'd eaten lunch, or if she'd been too busy trying to soothe her son, wondering why he was wondering about any of this at all. That night, Vincent worked late in his study as usual, the mansion settling into its evening quiet around him. The grandfather clock chimed midnight and he was just closing his laptop when he heard it. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow, tired. Then a door opening and closing. The kitchen door. Vincent sat still, listening. After a moment, he heard something else. A soft sound that might have been crying. Not the baby this time. An adult. Trying hard to be quiet about it. He shouldn't investigate. It was none of his business. Whatever was happening in the kitchen at midnight wasn't his concern. Vincent was walking toward the kitchen before he'd consciously decided to move. The kitchen was a massive space. All granite countertops and stainless steel appliances, designed to accommodate elaborate dinner parties Vincent never hosted anymore. At this hour, it was dark except for the light over the stove, casting long shadows across the floor. Sophia sat at the small staff table in the corner, Luca cradled against her shoulder, both of them illuminated by the soft glow. She was wearing a bathrobe over what looked like pajamas, her dark hair loose and tangled, and she was crying, silent tears streaming down her face while she rocked back and forth, trying to soothe a baby who was whimpering but not quite wailing. "Sophia!" She jumped, nearly dropping the baby. "Mr. Marcello, I'm so sorry, I didn't know anyone was still up. I'll go back to my room, I just thought. He's been crying for hours and I didn't want to disturb anyone, and I thought maybe if I walked around the kitchen." "It's fine," Vincent said, moving closer. In the dim light, Sophia looked even more exhausted than usual. Her eyes were red and swollen, her hands trembling slightly as she held her son. "How long has he been crying?" "Since 7 o'clock. 5 hours. Her voice broke. "I've tried everything. Feeding him, changing him, holding him, putting him down, walking with him, singing to him. Nothing works. The doctor said it's colic, that it'll pass, but I don't know how to help him. I don't know what I'm doing wrong." "You're not doing anything wrong. Then why won't he stop crying?" Sophia's voice rose slightly, edged with desperation. "Why can't I comfort my own baby? What kind of mother can't—" "The exhausted kind," Vincent interrupted gently. "When's the last time you slept more than 2 hours straight?" Sophia laughed, a broken sound. "I don't remember. A week ago? Maybe longer? And when's the last time you ate a full meal?" She didn't answer, which was answer enough. Vincent studied the scene before him. This young woman at the end of her rope holding a baby who seemed determined to remain inconsolable, both of them trapped in a cycle of exhaustion and frustration that had no clear solution. He should leave, should let Sophia handle her own child, should maintain the professional distance that had served him so well for 3 years. Instead, Vincent heard himself say, "May I?" Sophia looked up at him confused. "Sir, may I hold him?" Just for a moment. The surprise on Sophia's face was almost comical, but after a second of hesitation she carefully transferred the baby to Vincent's arms. Luca was heavier than Vincent expected, solid and warm. He was wearing a blue onesie covered in tiny elephants, and his face was red and scrunched from crying. As soon as Vincent took him, Luca let out another wail of protest. Vincent had held a baby exactly once in his life, his nephew, Marco's son, at a christening 15 years ago. He'd been terrified then of dropping the child or holding him wrong. He'd handed the baby back after 30 seconds and sworn off infant handling forever. But his body seemed to remember something his mind had forgotten. His arms adjusted automatically, cradling Luca's head, supporting his small body. And then Vincent did something he hadn't planned, hadn't thought about. He started walking, not pacing frantically the way Sophia had been doing, just walking slowly around the kitchen, his steps measured and steady, his movements calm and rhythmic. He kept one hand supporting Luca's head, while the other rested against the baby's back, patting gently in time with his steps. "Shh," Vincent murmured, surprising himself. "You're all right. Everything's all right." Luca's cries didn't stop immediately, but after a minute, they lessened in intensity. After 2 minutes, they became more intermittent, punctuated by small hiccuping sounds. After 3 minutes, they stopped altogether. Vincent continued walking, afraid that stopping would break whatever spell he'd accidentally cast. In his arms, Luca's tiny body relaxed, the tension leaving his small frame. His eyes, dark blue, though Vincent had read they might change color, blinked slowly, fighting sleep. "How did you do that?" Sophia whispered from the table, staring at them with an expression of wonder and exhaustion. "I have no idea," Vincent admitted honestly. He glanced down at Luca, who was now making small snuffling sounds against his shoulder. "Maybe he just wore himself out." "You have a rhythm," Sophia said softly. "When you walk, it's very steady. Maybe that's what he needed. Something calm and predictable." Vincent looked at her, really looked at her, for perhaps the first time since she'd started working for him. In the soft light, despite her exhaustion and tears, Sophia had a gentle beauty, not the dramatic, polished kind that filled the social circles Vincent moved through, but something warmer, more genuine. And in her eyes, beneath the tiredness, he saw strength, the kind of strength that came from continuing forward even when every part of you wanted to give up. "You should sleep," he said quietly, still walking with Luca. "Go to your room. I'll bring him to you when he's fully asleep." "Mr. Marcello, I can't ask you to." "You're not asking, I'm offering." Vincent glanced down at the baby who was now completely still, his breathing deep and even. "He's asleep. This won't take long." Sophia stood slowly, swaying slightly on her feet. "I don't understand. Why are you being so kind to me?" It was a fair question. Vincent wasn't known for his kindness. His business associates called him fair, but ruthless. His staff respected him but kept their distance. He'd built his entire adult life on maintaining control through emotional distance. "Maybe I'm not as unkind as everyone thinks," Vincent said, though even he didn't quite believe it. Sophia's eyes filled with fresh tears. "Thank you for this, for letting me keep my job when I know I'm not performing the way I should, for not judging me for being a single mother, for everything." She left before Vincent could respond, her footsteps quiet on the kitchen tiles. Vincent stood alone in the dim kitchen, holding a sleeping baby who wasn't his, would never be his, and felt something crack open in his chest, a space that had been sealed shut for 3 years, kept closed through sheer force of will, and the determination never to be hurt like that again. Luca made a small sound in his sleep, his tiny hand curling against Vincent's chest. And Vincent, who had spent 3 years refusing to feel anything that mattered, felt his carefully constructed walls begin to crumble. It became a pattern. Vincent didn't plan it, didn't consciously decide to make himself available during Luca's crying jags. But somehow over the following weeks he found himself working late in his study more often, found himself taking evening walks through the house that just happened to pass by the east wing, found himself listening for the sound of a crying baby the way he might have listened for an alarm bell. And when he heard it, when Luca's cries echoed through the mansion's halls, Vincent would quietly make his way to the kitchen, where Sophia inevitably ended up, trying to soothe her son away from the sleeping staff. They never spoke about it. Sophia would simply hand over the baby when Vincent appeared, relief and gratitude evident on her face. Vincent would walk with Luca until the crying stopped, until the small body relaxed into sleep. Then he'd return Luca to Sophia's arms and disappear back to his study without a word. It was an unspoken arrangement, a secret kindness that neither of them acknowledged in daylight. During the day, Vincent was still the boss, still distant, still focused on business, still the man who commanded respect through authority and control. Sophia was still the maid, still quiet and deferential, still working harder than she probably should while caring for a newborn. But at night, in the kitchen's soft light, they were just two people helping each other survive. "You've been spending a lot of time in the kitchen lately," Marco observed one morning in mid-December, his tone carefully neutral. Vincent didn't look up from the financial report spread across his desk. "Have I?" "The night security noticed. Said you're down there almost every night around midnight. The kitchen has excellent coffee. At midnight. I keep irregular hours. You know that." Marco settled into the chair across from Vincent's desk, his expression thoughtful. "This wouldn't have anything to do with Sophia and the baby, would it?" Vincent's hands stilled on the papers, but his face remained impassive. "Why would it?" "Because according to the staff, that baby cries every night. And according to security, you show up in the kitchen right around the same time. And according to Sophia, who Angela cornered yesterday about disturbing the boss, you've been helping calm Luca down. Is there a question in there somewhere?" "Just an observation. You've been different lately." "Different how?" Marco leaned back, studying his boss with the familiarity of 15 years of friendship. "Less distant, more present. Like you're actually living in this house instead of just haunting it." Vincent set down the reports, meeting Marco's gaze directly. "The baby cries. I help calm him down. It's no different than fixing a leaking pipe or a broken window, solving a problem that affects the household." "You really believe that?" "I don't know what I believe," Vincent admitted quietly, "but I know that when that baby cries, something in me responds. I can't explain it better than that." "You don't have to explain it, Vince. You just have to accept it." Marco leaned forward. "You lost a son. That kind of pain doesn't just disappear. Maybe helping with Luca is part of healing. I'm not trying to replace. I know you're not. Nobody could replace what you lost. But that doesn't mean you can't care about this child, that you can't help his mother, that you can't let yourself feel something again." Vincent turned to the window, watching snow fall in thick flakes coating the grounds in white. "It's not appropriate. She works for me. He's her son. I'm overstepping boundaries." "Are you?" Marco challenged. "Or are you being human, showing compassion? There's nothing wrong with helping someone who needs it, Vince, even if it makes you uncomfortable." "Everything about this makes me uncomfortable." "Good. Comfort is overrated. You've been too comfortable in your isolation." Vincent didn't respond. Outside, the snow continued to fall, transforming the landscape into something beautiful and temporary. By tomorrow, the grounds crew would clear it all away, reveal the dead grass and frozen earth beneath. Nothing beautiful lasted. Nothing good stayed. "The Santoros are making moves again," Marco said, changing the subject. "Tommy's hearing rumors they're trying to negotiate with our suppliers, undercut our prices. Let them try. Our relationships run deeper than price points. They're also spreading rumors about us. About you specifically." "What kind of rumors?" "That you're distracted, that your attention isn't on business anymore, that the organization is vulnerable." Vincent's jaw tightened. "Based on what evidence?" "Based on the fact that you've turned down 3 dinner meetings in the past month, that you're leaving the office earlier than you used to, that you're, and I quote, going soft." "I see. It's nothing we can't handle," Marco assured him. "Just noise. But it's something to be aware of. The vultures are circling. They smell weakness. Then we'll remind them why circling the Marcellos is a fatal mistake." Vincent turned back to his desk, his expression hardening into the mask he wore for business. "Set up a meeting with our key suppliers. I want to reinforce those relationships personally, and let it be known that any attempt to interfere with our operations will be met with immediate consequences." "What kind of consequences?" "The legal kind. I want lawyers ready to file lawsuits for contract interference, antitrust violations, whatever our legal team can make stick. We do this cleanly, Marco. By the book." Marco nodded approvingly. "The legitimate approach. Elena would be proud. The mention of his wife's name made Vincent's chest tighten, but he didn't flinch. Elena always said there was more power in being untouchable legally than in being feared. She was right, and it looks better for succession planning if everything's clean. There it was again. Succession. The future. The heir he didn't have. One problem at a time, Vincent said shortly. Deal with the Santoros first. After Marco left, Vincent sat alone in his study, thinking about rumors and reality, about perception and truth. The Santoros thought he was distracted, going soft. And maybe they were right. Maybe spending his nights walking a colicky baby around a kitchen was making him weak. But Vincent didn't feel weak. For the first time in 3 years, he felt awake. Christmas came and went. Vincent bought gifts for the staff, as he always did. Generous bonuses, expensive bottles of wine, gift cards to upscale stores. He'd learned long ago that money was the most efficient way to show appreciation without requiring emotional investment. But this year, he found himself standing in a children's store in downtown White Plains, surrounded by toys and clothes and equipment, feeling completely out of his depth. "Can I help you find something?" a cheerful saleswoman asked, appearing at his elbow. "A gift. For an infant. 2 months old." "How wonderful. Is this for your grandchild?" "No, a friend's child." The lie came easily, though Vincent wasn't sure why he felt the need to lie at all. "Well, at 2 months, babies love high contrast patterns. Soft textures, things that make gentle sounds." The woman led him through the store, pointing out various items. "This mobile has black and white patterns that are perfect for visual development. These soft books have different textures for sensory exploration. This rattle has a gentle chime that—" "I'll take them all," Vincent interrupted. The woman blinked. "All of them?" "Everything you just showed me. And add some clothes. Practical ones. Size 3 to 6 months. 15 minutes and several $100s later, Vincent left the store with bags full of items he had no idea how to use, or if they were even appropriate. He felt foolish. He was a powerful man who controlled an empire, and he'd just panic bought a store's worth of baby supplies. He almost turned back to return everything. Instead, he drove home, brought the bags up to his study, and hid them in a closet. He'd give them to Sophia after Christmas. Or maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he'd just donate them somewhere. He hadn't decided yet. That night, when Luca's cries echoed through the mansion, Vincent found himself in the kitchen as usual. Sophia handed over the baby with a tired smile. "Merry Christmas, Mr. Marcello," she said softly. "Merry Christmas, Sophia." As Vincent walked with Luca, humming a tune he didn't remember learning, he decided he'd give Sophia the gifts. Not because he wanted recognition or gratitude, but because it was practical. Because Luca needed things and Vincent could afford them, and there was no point in letting perfectly good supplies go to waste. It was logical, practical. It had nothing to do with the way his chest felt less hollow when he held this baby. Nothing to do with the way Sophia's grateful smiles had started to make him feel almost human again. Nothing to do with the fact that for the first time in 3 years, he was looking forward to something. These quiet midnight moments when the world narrowed down to a crying baby, a tired mother, and a man learning how to feel again. Nothing to do with any of that at all. "I need to talk to you about Sophia." Vincent looked up from his breakfast to find Angela standing in the dining room doorway, her expression severe. "We've had this conversation, Angela." She stays. "That's not what I want to discuss. I want to talk about her living arrangements." Vincent set down his coffee. "What about them? The room she's in, it's barely suitable for one person, let alone a mother and infant. It's small, drafty, and the walls are thin. I can hear the baby crying from my room 3 doors down. Get to the point." Angela's lips thinned. "The point is, if you're determined to keep her employed here, she needs better accommodations. There are larger rooms in the West Wing that would be more suitable. Rooms with actual insulation and space for a crib and supplies." Vincent studied his head housekeeper, recognizing the careful neutrality in her tone. Angela might disapprove of the situation, but she was professional enough to recognize a losing battle when she saw one. "You're right," Vincent said, surprising them both. "Have one of the West Wing suites prepared, the one with the sitting room attached, and make sure it's properly stocked with anything she might need." "Sir, those suites are for whoever I decide to put in them." Vincent's tone left no room for argument. "Is that going to be a problem, Angela?" "No, sir. I'll have it ready by tomorrow." After she left, Vincent sat alone with his breakfast and the uncomfortable realization that Marco was right. He was becoming invested in Sophia and Luca's well-being in ways that went far beyond appropriate employer concern. He should step back, should re-establish proper boundaries, should remember that getting attached to people only led to pain. But when he tried to imagine the mansion without Luca's midnight cries, without Sophia's tired smiles, without those quiet moments in the kitchen when the world felt less empty, he couldn't do it. For better or worse, they had become part of his life. And Vincent, who had spent 3 years protecting himself from exactly this kind of vulnerability, found that he didn't want to let them go. On New Year's Eve, Vincent was working late as always, trying not to think about the fact that this time last year, he'd been in this same spot, alone with his grief and his memories. The grandfather clock chimed 11:30, and he was preparing to call it a night when Marco appeared in his doorway. "Got a minute? Come in." Marco entered, looking unusually serious. "I did some checking on Sophia. Standard background verification, nothing invasive. Just wanted to make sure we knew who was living under your roof." Vincent felt his shoulders tense. And she's clean. No criminal record, no red flags. Parents deceased, no siblings. She's been on her own since she was 18. Worked 3 jobs before she came here." Marco paused. "No father listed on Luca's birth certificate. I didn't ask you to investigate her personal life. I know. But given how involved you've become, I thought you should know. She's alone, Vince. Completely alone. No family, no support system. Just her and the baby." Vincent absorbed this information, feeling it settle over him like a weight. Sophia had been managing everything by herself: pregnancy, childbirth, infant care, a full-time job, with no one to help her, no one to lean on. No wonder she looked so exhausted all the time. "Is there a point to this information?" Vincent asked quietly. "Just that maybe that's why helping her feels important to you. You recognize something in her situation. The isolation, the loss, the burden of handling everything alone." Marco met his eyes. "You're both survivors, Vince. Maybe that's the real connection here." Before Vincent could respond, a sound drifted down the hallway. Familiar now. Expected. Luca, crying. Vincent checked his watch. 11:45. Sophia would be in the kitchen soon if she wasn't already there. "I should," he started. "Go," Marco said, a small smile crossing his face. "It's almost midnight. Might as well start the new year doing something that matters." Vincent found Sophia in the kitchen, as predicted. But tonight was different. Tonight she was dressed in actual clothes instead of her bathrobe, dark jeans and a soft sweater, and her hair was styled, pulled back in a neat braid. She looked less exhausted than usual, almost pretty in the soft light. "You're up late," Vincent observed as she handed over the crying Luca. "I wanted to see the new year in," Sophia said, gesturing to the small television on the kitchen counter, showing the Times Square celebration. "Seems silly, but it feels important somehow. A fresh start." Vincent began his now familiar walk around the kitchen, Luca's cries already diminishing. Fresh starts are overrated. It's the same life, just with a different date. Maybe. Or maybe it's a chance to choose differently, to be better than we were. From the television, the crowd in Times Square began counting down. 60 seconds until midnight. "Do you make resolutions?" Sophia asked, watching Vincent walk with her son. "No. They're just broken promises. That's pessimistic. That's realistic. 30 seconds. I make them," Sophia said softly. "Every year. This year I'm resolving to be strong enough for both of us, Luca and me, to not just survive but to build a good life for him, to show him that where you start doesn't determine where you end up." 20 seconds. In Vincent's arms, Luca had stopped crying, his eyes half closed, his breathing settling into the rhythm of approaching sleep. 10 seconds. The crowd on television roared, counting down the final seconds of the year. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. "Happy New Year!" the television crowd screamed. Fireworks exploded across the screen in brilliant colors. In the kitchen, Sophia and Vincent stood in comfortable silence, the only sound Luca's soft breathing and the distant celebration from the TV. "Happy New Year, Mr. Marcello," Sophia said quietly. "Happy New Year, Sophia." Vincent looked down at the sleeping baby in his arms, this tiny life that had somehow cracked open his carefully sealed heart. In the soft kitchen light, Luca's features were peaceful, vulnerable, perfect in the way that all children were perfect, full of potential, unmarked by the world's hardness. As Vincent adjusted his hold, preparing to hand Luca back to Sophia, His hand brushed against the baby's neck, and he felt it. A small, raised mark, just below Luca's ear. Vincent's heart stopped. He shifted Luca slightly, angling the baby toward the light, and there it was. Small, distinctive, a birthmark shaped like a crescent moon, the exact same birthmark that Vincent had, that his father had, that his grandfather had. A family mark, passed down through generations. Vincent's hands began to tremble. His mind raced, calculating, remembering. When had Sophia started working here? 6 months before Luca was born, which meant she'd gotten pregnant. October. Last October. And last October there had been a charity gala at the mansion. Vincent remembered it vaguely. An event Elena had planned before she died. One he'd felt obligated to host. He remembered drinking too much, trying to numb the pain of the anniversary of her death. He remembered being helped to his room by a staff member. He remembered very little else about that night, but he remembered waking up the next morning with a pounding headache and a vague sense that something had happened, something he couldn't quite recall. Vincent looked at Sophia, really looked at her, seeing her with new eyes. She was studiously avoiding his gaze, focused on the television, her body language suddenly tense in a way that seemed significant. She knew, or she suspected, and she'd never said anything. "Sophia," Vincent said, his voice hoarse. "We need to talk." She finally looked at him, and in her eyes, he saw fear, resignation, and something that might have been relief. "I know," she whispered. "I know we do." Luca slept on, peaceful and unaware as the new year began, and everything Vincent thought he understood about his life shifted on its axis. Vincent hadn't slept. He'd spent the entire night in his study, staring at photographs he'd pulled from a locked drawer, pictures of his father, his grandfather, each one showing the distinctive crescent moon birthmark that marked the Marcello bloodline, the same birthmark he'd seen on Luca's neck. At 7 a.m., he called his private physician. "Dr. Patterson, I need a DNA test. Discreet. Today." 2 hours later, the doctor arrived, asked no questions, and collected the samples Vincent had prepared, his own and a cotton swab he'd carefully taken from Luca's mouth during the baby's morning feeding, while Sophia showered. "Results in 48 hours, Dr. Patterson said quietly. "I'll call you directly." Those 48 hours felt like 48 years. Vincent couldn't focus on work, couldn't eat, couldn't think about anything except the possibility that had detonated in his mind like a bomb. Luca might be his son, the heir everyone had been demanding, the family continuation his organization required, the child he'd thought he'd never have after Elena's death. But if it was true, if Luca was his, it meant that night last October had been real, that something had happened between him and Sophia that neither of them had fully acknowledged. Vincent remembered fragments now, pieces emerging from the alcohol-induced fog. Sophia helping him upstairs, her concerned face, the way she'd steadied him when he stumbled, and then darkness, gaps, moments that dissolved into nothing. Had he done something unforgivable? Had he taken advantage of an employee while drunk? The thought made him physically ill. On the second day, Vincent found himself watching Sophia with new eyes. She went about her duties quietly, avoiding his gaze, her body language screaming discomfort. She knew he suspected something, and her silence felt like confirmation. When Dr. Patterson finally called, Vincent's hands shook as he answered. "Mr. Marcello, the results are conclusive. There's a 99.9% probability of paternity. The child is yours." Vincent sat down heavily, the room spinning. "You're certain?" "Absolutely certain. Congratulations." After hanging up, Vincent sat in silence for a long time. He had a son, a living, breathing son, the heir everyone wanted, the future he'd thought impossible, and he had no idea what to do about it. That evening, Vincent found Sophia in the library, dusting shelves while Luca slept in a portable bassinet nearby. She tensed when she heard him enter. "Sophia, we need to talk. Now." Her hand stilled on a book spine. "I know." The library. Close the door. Once they were alone, Vincent stood by the window, struggling to contain the storm of emotions raging inside him. That night, the gala, last October. "Tell me what happened." Sophia's voice was barely a whisper. "You were hurting. It was the anniversary of your wife's death. You'd been drinking. I helped you to your room. And then? I don't know." Tears streamed down her face. "I swear, Mr. Marcello, I don't remember." I woke up the next morning in my own room, confused, with gaps in my memory. I thought maybe I'd imagined everything, but then I realized I was pregnant, and why didn't you tell me? Tell you what? That we might have. I wasn't even sure it happened, and you're my boss, you're powerful, I'm nobody. Who would believe me? Who would care? Vincent turned to face her. I had a DNA test done. Luca is my son. Sophia's legs gave out. She sank into a chair, her face pale. Oh God. Did you know? Suspect? The birthmark, she whispered. I saw yours once when you were swimming in the pool last summer, and when Luca was born with the same mark, I wondered. But I was too afraid to say anything. Afraid of what? Afraid you'd take him from me. Afraid you'd think I planned this. Afraid you'd fire me or worse. I'm just a maid, Mr. Marcello. You're everything. How could I possibly? You should have told me. Vincent's voice was firm, but not angry. Regardless of power or position, I had a right to know I had a son. You're right, I'm sorry, I was just so scared and alone and… A knock interrupted them. Marco entered, his face grim. Vince, we have a problem. Word's gotten out about the baby. The Santoros know there's a child in this house. They're making threats, saying they'll use any leverage they can find against us. Vincent's blood ran cold. They threatened Luca? Not directly, but the implication was clear. They think he's just your housemaid's kid, but if they find out he's actually yours, he becomes a target. Vincent finished. He looked at Sophia, saw the terror in her eyes. I won't let anything happen to him, to either of them. What do you want to do? Marco asked. Vincent made a decision that surprised even himself. Increase security around the East Wing immediately. No one gets near Sophia or Luca without my explicit permission. And Marco? Start making arrangements. It's time I had a serious conversation with the Santoro family. A final one. After Marco left, Vincent turned back to Sophia. I'm going to protect you both, whatever it takes. But I need you to trust me. Why? Sophia's voice broke. Why would you do this for us? Vincent looked at the sleeping baby, his son, and felt something fundamental shift inside him. Because he's mine. Because you both deserve better than fear. And because for the first time in 3 years I have something worth fighting for. Sophia began to cry in earnest then, relief and terror mixing together. I never wanted to trap you. Never wanted to… I know. Vincent surprised himself by crossing the room and taking her hand. But we're here now, and we'll figure this out together. Outside, snow began to fall again, covering the world in white. And in the library, 3 people who'd been alone began, hesitantly, to become something that looked almost like a family. The question was whether Vincent's world would let them survive long enough to find out what that meant. 3 months later, spring arrived slowly in upstate New York, the frozen ground reluctantly surrendering to new life. In the mansion's garden, the first crocuses pushed through the last patches of snow, purple and white against the brown earth. Vincent stood at his study window, watching Sophia walk with Luca in the garden below. The baby was 6 months old now, bigger and stronger, his cries less frequent. Sophia looked different too, healthier, rested, her steps lighter than they'd been in months. The past 3 months had changed everything. After confirming Luca was his son, Vincent had made difficult choices. He'd met with the Santoro family, not with threats but with a proposition, a business arrangement that gave them profitable territory in exchange for a permanent peace treaty. It cost him power and money, but it bought something more valuable, safety for his family. Because that's what they'd become, a family. Vincent had moved Sophia and Luca to the main house, into a suite near his own rooms. He'd learned to change diapers at 3 a.m., to warm bottles to the perfect temperature, to recognize the different types of cries and what each one meant. He'd also begun the slow process of legitimizing his business operations, working with lawyers to transition away from the gray areas that had defined his empire. It would take years, but he'd started. For Luca. For the future. You're smiling, Marco observed from the doorway. That's new. Is it? Yeah, it is. Marco stepped inside, grinning. Fatherhood suits you, Vince. Who knew? Vincent turned from the window. I'm trying, Marco. That's all. Just trying to be the father he deserves. You're doing more than trying. You're succeeding. Marco's expression grew serious. The organization's stabilizing. The legitimate businesses are growing. People respect the changes you're making. And the Santoros? Quiet. The treaty's holding. Turns out giving them what they actually wanted, respect and profit, worked better than posturing. Vincent nodded. feeling something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Peace. Actual peace. A knock at the door revealed Sophia, carrying Luca. "I'm sorry to interrupt, but someone wants to say hi to his papa." Papa. The word still made Vincent's heart skip. He crossed the room, taking Luca into his arms. The baby gurgled happily, reaching for Vincent's face with pudgy hands. That crescent moon birthmark was visible on his neck, a permanent reminder of blood and legacy and connection. "How was your walk?" Vincent asked Sophia. "Beautiful. The garden's coming alive again." She paused, then added softly, "Like everything else around here." Their eyes met, and Vincent saw something in her gaze he'd been noticing more often lately. Not just gratitude or relief, but something warmer, something that spoke of trust slowly building, of walls carefully coming down. They hadn't discussed what they were to each other, weren't dating, weren't married, weren't anything official, but they were raising a child together, learning to communicate, building something neither had expected. "Sophia, I've been thinking," Vincent began, "about the future, about what Luca needs, what we all need." "What do you mean?" "I mean, I want to do this right, not just provide for him financially, but be present. Be the kind of father who shows up, who's there for every milestone, who puts family first." He looked down at Luca, who was trying to grab his tie. "I want us to be a real family, however that looks." Tears filled Sophia's eyes. "Vincent, I want that too. So much." 6 months later, the mansion's gardens blazed with autumn color. Vincent stood on the terrace, watching Luca take his first wobbly steps across the grass, Sophia's hands hovering nearby to catch him if he fell. The baby, almost a year old now, took 3 uncertain steps, then 4, then tumbled into his mother's waiting arms, squealing with delight. Vincent's chest tightened with emotions he'd once thought lost forever. Joy, pride, love. Marco joined him on the terrace, handing him a coffee. "You've come a long way, boss." "We all have. You know what Elena would say if she could see you now?" Vincent smiled, finally able to think of his late wife without crushing grief. "She'd say it's about time I let myself live again." She'd be right. Below, Sophia looked up, catching Vincent's eye. She smiled and he smiled back. A real smile, the kind that reached his eyes. "Come on, Papa," Sophia called. "Come help him walk." Vincent set down his coffee and descended the terrace steps. He knelt on the grass, arms outstretched. "Come on, Luca. Come to Papa." The baby's face lit up. He pushed away from Sophia and toddled forward, arms flailing for balance. 1 step, 2, 3, 4, 5. He made it halfway before starting to fall, and Vincent caught him, sweeping him up into his arms. "You did it! You walked to me!" Luca laughed, the sound pure and joyful, and Vincent held him close. This unexpected gift, this second chance at fatherhood. Sophia moved to stand beside them, and Vincent reached out with his free arm, pulling her into their embrace. They stood there in the autumn garden, a powerful man who'd learned that real strength was choosing love over fear, a woman who'd found safety and partnership in the most unexpected place, and a child who'd brought them all back to life. "Blood doesn't make a family," Vincent murmured, looking at Sophia and Luca. "Choice does. And every day, I choose you both." Sophia rested her head on his shoulder. "We choose you too." In the mansion behind them, the grandfather clock chimed the hour, marking time that no longer felt like a burden but like a gift. Vincent Marcello had spent 3 years as a ghost, haunting his own life, but in choosing to love again, to risk again, to build a family from unexpected circumstances, he'd found something more valuable than any empire. He'd found home.